My name is Somi Kumari, and I am Assistant Professor in ABES Engineering College, Ghaziabad. In today's session, we will be discussing about the classification and clustering. The agenda of the session will be introduction of classification, clustering, their examples, how they are related to each other, how they are different, how they are similar. Starting the session now. So first I will introduce classification. We all are familiar with the word class or classification. We often use this term, like we often say, this thing belongs to this particular class. For example, if I ask you by showing the apple, what is the class of this apple? You will answer, this is fruit. If I will show you car, then you will say, this belongs to the vehicle class. So what happens in classification? In classification, we predefine the class previously. So this is the thing you should note, that in classification, we use predefined classes. That means classes have been predefined. You can relate this thing with the given graph. In this graph, we have predefined two classes, class A and class B. And after defining the class A and class B, like this data belongs to class A, this triangle belongs to class B. So you can say the class A consists of circle and class B consists of triangle. So whenever new triangles will come, you will classify them in class B. And whenever new dot comes or new circle comes, you will classify them in class A. So the main objective of classification is to classify into the groups, and that also you have defined your classes previously. For example, in day-to-day life, if I will show you apple and I will ask what is the class of this apple, you will say this is fruit. So apple belongs to fruit class. And if I will show you the image of desire, swift desire, you will say this belongs to the class car. So what happens in classification? You previously determine the class of the object, and after that, whenever you encounter new data points or new object, you categorize them according to the classes. So in classification, a program learns from the given data set or observation and classify new observation according to the classes or groups. Moving to the next slide. These are the two types of classification, binary classification and multi-class classification. As the name suggests, binary classification means there will be two classes. It cannot be more than two classes because the word itself says binary, and binary means two. So in this classification, you will find two classes. This is the class of square, and this is the class of circle. In case of multi-class classification, as the name suggests, there will be multiple classes, and you can see in the diagram, there are multiple classes. Class of triangle, class of circle, class of hexagon. So there are three different classes. And it can be more than three classes as well. But in case of binary class, you will find there are only two classes. So moving to the next slide. What is clustering? We often get confused with the classification and clustering. We often think that clustering and classifications are same. To some extent, they are similar, they are related to each other because in both cases, classification and clustering, we divide it into categories, whether it is case of classification or whether it is case of clustering. So you can say that both are similar to some extent, and that's why we often get confused. But then what is the difference? The difference is that in case of classification, as I told you, that we determine the classes previously. We know the class on prior basis. And after that, we classify the objects or data into that particular classes. Whereas in case of clustering, we don't have prior information. We don't know the classes previously or category previously. Then how does clustering work? In clustering, what happens? As I said you, that classifications are predefined, but the clusters are not predefined. They are not predefined. In case of clustering, they group based on similarity. And based on similarity, the data are grouped into the clusters. So the basic difference between them is in classification, we have prior knowledge of classes, whereas in case of clusters, we don't have any prior knowledge. We categorize the thing based on the similarity, based on the similar features. Now moving to the next slide. Types of clustering. There are three types of clustering: model-based clustering, density-based clustering, and hierarchical clustering. Now we will see the comparison or difference between the classification and clustering. Classification is an example of supervised learning. Many of you are maybe not familiar with the supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So I will explain this in short. Supervised learning is learning where supervision is there, where guidance is provided, where data is labeled. It means you have input and output. So classification is an example of supervised learning. It means you have prior information. As I already explained you in classification introduction also. And clustering is unsupervised learning. It means here you don't have prior informations. Based on the similarity, the data are grouped into the category or cluster. Second, process of classifying the input instance based on their corresponding class labels. Again, same thing. Class label means we have already defined the class and we put the different object, instance, or data in that particular class. For example, we have, you can say, different class A, class B, class C. And whenever student comes, I will ask that you belong to which class. I will ask roll number and then I will say that you belong to the class A or class B. Whereas in case of clustering, we don't have label. That means in case of clustering, you don't have like cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. And when the student comes, you will say that you join the cluster A or you cluster B. In clustering, what will happen? We will like group the students based on their roll numbers or based on the similarity. That will be the roll number. And that we will say this is cluster A and this is cluster B and so on. In case of clustering, there is no need of training and testing the data set. Whereas in case of classification, you need to train and test the data. Complexity. Classifications are more complex as compared to the cluster. And obviously, clusters are less complex than classification. These are the few examples of classification like logistic regression, SVM, support vector machines. These are the example of algorithm which we study in machine learning or data science. And clustering algorithm consists of K-means, fuzzy C-means clustering algorithm, Gaussian EM clustering algorithm. These are the references you can go through. Thank you.